All right, thank you everybody for joining us tonight for our Darien Responders panel. We have a lot of great people here today, but first, my name is Tori and I'm in charge of this month's National Preparedness that we've been running at the library. I want to thank the Horizon Foundation for the grant that they've provided us with that could make all of these events possible this month. Just a few things coming up in the next week. On Monday, we're having a Be Prepared for Natural Disasters from the Red Cross at 7 p.m. And also Saturday the 30th, we're having an emergency preparedness fair from 10 to 2. So there'll be all the emergency vehicles and some information, and we're giving away emergency preparedness kits and lots of other free giveaways, and there'll be food and lots of prizes and fun. So please stop by. But tonight we're joined by a bunch of lovely people from the town. Deputy Fire Marshal and Emergency Manager for Darien, Mark McEwan. From the Darien Police Department, Lieutenant Robert Schreders. Sorry, I'm not going in the correct order. First Selectman Jayme Stevenson. Director of Health David Knauf. Fire Marshal Bob Buch. Director of Human Services Ali Ramsteck. President of Post 53 Hayden Edwards. Director of Post 53, Nancy Herling, and the Director of Darien Library, Alan Gray at the end there. I'm not sure who's starting, but we'll just kick it off.
I'll kick it off. Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. We're very happy to talk to you tonight about Darien's emergency preparedness team and the plans that we have at the ready for you. We're probably happiest to report that so far this year we haven't had to employ any of these plans, and really hoping that Hurricane Maria takes a hard right so we're not impacted by her either. I am one member of an extraordinary team, as you can see here, and this is just a small representation of the people who are part of our unified command center for our emergency preparedness operations. And really driving that bus or fire truck is Assistant Fire Marshal Mark McEwan, who is our emergency operations manager, and Deputy Emergency Operations Manager Chip Fatone is not here tonight, but Mark and Chip work very closely together. So with that, I will turn it over to Mark to kick off the substantive part of the program.
It's very substantive, but the reality to what we envisioned tonight to be was a quick statement from all of us about what we do and how we do it, and then really leave it up to you to guide the program in the directions you'd all like to discuss. So I'm going to make it as brief as it can be. And so emergency management, I've been in the business a long time with most of these folks. And we are all pretty much town residents for a very long period of time, with a few exceptions. But emergency management is about working together. So all your first responders, and then the secondary responders, as I like to refer to them, Public Works, other agencies in town like Human Services, the Health Department, who normally you don't associate with response because of their nature of their jobs, but in crisis, quite often it turns different directions. So we work with a lot of people locally, and I'm proud of the people we have today and we've had in the past. But most importantly, from my perspective as emergency management, is the fact that we have to work very closely with our partners in the government, which is state, and in the State Department of Emergency Management, Homeland Security, and then our federal partners in FEMA and DHS. So on a day-to-day basis, we don't interact very often with our government, but you'd be surprised to know that we do it very regularly, even in times of nothing going on in our area. So right now, the topics, I had a meeting today in emergency management. Hot topics are obviously what's going on in the rest of the country and the supplies and the manpower that's being distributed to those emergencies. So you see it on the news, we hear it a little quicker, but the reality is a lot's been going on in the nation, and that's one of the reasons I want to give everyone a chance to ask questions more than me telling you some information that you may already know. But our office, most importantly, our staff, is really responsible for responding to situations. I'm basically responsible for writing the plans that we all use to implement in times of crisis. And we do that now, it's biannually, it's every other year, but for periods after 9/11, it was every year. They went from a 5-year cycle back down to a 1-year cycle, and after Katrina, many people in the state and the federal scene, so to speak, had plans that were outdated from the times we all ducked under our desks. I mean, the crowd here is not young, so maybe not all of us, but some of us anyways, remember the days when you ducked under the desk and they talked about, you know, radiation bombs and things like that. So it was more civil defense back then. It's the same operation, it's just different names. So that really is the overarching goal, is we all work together and we use one system that the nation has recognized called the National Incident Management System. And not only do we use it in times of crisis, but we try to use it every day for our responses. So I don't know who wants to be second, but we can go down the line and we can draw straws. I'm done. There you go, Bob.
Just briefly, just for those who aren't familiar with the police department, we're a 51 officer agency, so we patrol the roughly 14 square miles, about 20,000 residents. On any given shift, you can have 5 to 7 patrol officers patrolling the entire town. In something like Hurricane Sandy, we were probably staffed with maybe 20 to 25 people. The police department is the main hub or call center for routine calls and emergency calls. So if you call the routine line or you dial 911, we're answering it at the police station. Okay. On a routine day, there could be 1 to 2 people staffing communications. In the evening and the overnight shift, it's usually just 1. For something like Sandy or a big event, we can staff as many up to 3. The police department is also, we host the Emergency Operations Center. So if we were to have a very big event like Sandy, Jayme Stevenson, Mark McEwan, Bob Buch, everybody at this table would come to the police department and staff that center. And everyone has their own phones. You have a bunch of different TV screens, and we all work together as a team out of that center. It's not used very often. I think probably the last time we really fully staffed it was Sandy. So that's basically, so you just understand again, when you call for the fire department, when you call for an ambulance, it's all coming through the police department. While we work with all the agencies in town, in something like a Sandy or a big event, weather event like that, we really rely heavily on the fire department and of course EMS, and the 3 of us have to work very closely together. We lean on the fire department a lot because we only have so many people to block roads, wires, you know, flooded basements, things of that nature, those typical calls you would get in a big weather-related event like that. So I think we all work pretty well together.
And I think one of the concepts of the police department and the 911 center is the fact that, I know you've probably all heard this if you've heard a code red and know that we call you with messages, but one of the messages we like to remind our people in the community is that 911 is for emergency use. It's been known to happen, I'm not saying anybody here obviously, it's been known to happen where people have a different threshold of what a true emergency is. Right. So we've gotten phone calls where people's basements are flooded, and then sometimes you go there and you find out that the flood's an inch of water on the floor. Sometimes it's right to the rafters, and I've seen it personally. 2007, I saw it 3 times. So we kind of remind the citizens that if you have a true emergency, we want to react to it quickly. The reality, though, is if a lot of people are calling for, you know, tree branches in the roadway or less emergent situations, it ties up the staff on the call center, but it also ties up people going to investigate. So we just kind of always use that message, I think, almost every situation we've had since I've been involved in emergency management.
Some of the examples of misuse of 911 is using 911 to report your power outage, your neighbor's garbage can rolling down the street. You know, flooded basement, I know it can be unnerving, but again, as headquarters gets inundated with the calls, those 911 calls that aren't true emergencies could prevent a true emergency from being called in. The lines get bogged down, and that call center, just even with 3 people in there, it gets overwhelming in a real heated event like that. And also, believe it or not, in sometimes in the height of storms, we have people come to the lobby to report something that, would allow itself to discretionary time, like an identity theft report or a larceny. With 100-mile-an-hour winds, we're not going to send someone down to the lobby to take that report at that time. We're gonna ask you to come back because all our officers are going to be out, obviously, on the roads.
So what's the next steps when there's an overflow of calls? Is there like an overflow center in Stanford? Darien, like what do you guys do when there are too many calls coming in and you can't handle it?
We just go one at a time, and the officers that work in dispatch monitor the calls. If it's not an emergency call, sometimes we have to hang up and free the line, or tell them to call back on a routine line, or tell them to call back another time. In a height of a storm like Sandy, when the winds are really high, you get 100-mile-an-hour winds. We're basically going to stage here. Officers aren't going to be on the road. It's too dangerous. We will go out if there's a life-threatening, if it's a true emergency. The calls we will continue to investigate is something like domestic violence, serious crime. Obviously, if a woman came to the lobby in the middle of a storm reporting domestic violence, we're not going to turn her away. It's the discretionary calls that can be handled at another time, the non-emergency calls. But we try to prioritize and triage the calls as they come in.
Sort of a technical question, but since everybody's on mobile phones these days, how do we know that we dial 911, we're getting to Darien, or do we ask that it's Darien?
Yeah, that's a good question. Typically, if you dial 911 and you're on the roadway, you're going to get the state police. So you're going to be speaking to someone at Troop G in Bridgeport, and they're going to transfer you to Darien, to the Darien officer on the desk. And a lot of times we get calls from Norwalk or Stanford from cell phones, and we in turn have to transfer back to Norwalk, so that happens a lot. But the dispatch center is it's completely automated, so we can transfer those calls very quickly. So it's not like the person's really. It seems like you're waiting a long time, but in reality, it happens pretty quickly.
This might be a stupid question. Will you ever get a busy signal when you dial 911?
That's a good question. I'm not sure about 911. Definitely the routine line, you could get a busy signal.
Okay.
Or it might go to, we have a voicemail system now where it could go into a voicemail. But we try to answer the calls as quickly as possible. And like I said, in the big event, you're going to have 3 call takers in there. So.
The only phone I use is my cell phone, and it's a Nashville, Tennessee 615 number.
Yep.
So if I did that, even from my home, and it was a 911,
you'll
that
either
wouldn't
get
go to Tennessee, would it?
No, you'll either get our call center or the state police call center. Depending on where you live in town, it could jump a tower and go to Stanford dispatch.
Well, I can walk.
Right, but even if that did happen, you would get transferred back to Darien. You just have to.
Okay.
It's a cell tower that your phone connects to.
Okay.
You just have to stay calm and just be able to relay where you are.
But it is a good thing to have the routine number of the police department as well, either in your cell phones or on your home phones, or have it written down, because 911, the infrastructure that the state of Connecticut provides, and it's not a local thing, it's the state, is designed so that there's redundancy. So if Darien gets overwhelmed, the call will automatically route to another call center. I'm not sure, since we just changed our 911 equipment, if that's still New Canaan, but for years it was New Canaan. So it was a light community, so you didn't go from a small town to a big city, or a big city to a small town. That has been recently changed. I think about 8 months ago we got new equipment.
Within the year, yeah.
And so that is built into it, but I know 911 systems across the nation have had situations where they go out, and you get complaints that the signal was busy. So I don't know if it's a failure of the software, the hardware, or what. If you get a 911 and for whatever reason you get a busy signal, that's where you really need the routine number, because you're still talking to the same person. And they do answer it. It's not like they just say it's routine, we're not going to answer it. So it's getting answered.
I don't want people to misunderstand. I'm not discouraging anyone from calling the police department, right? There's just different avenues, and we'll figure it out, because without the community calling the police department, we're not going to know about the tree down, the wires down, the house on fire, the smell, the smell of gas. We rely on you to to tell us what's going on so we can make sure that we have the wherewithal to send, the equipment that we need to that location.
I'm here on behalf of a large church congregation, and we see a lot of times with natural disasters or other emergency events that there are a lot of things that could be prevented, and like a flooded basement or a tree or one of those, having some extra food or something, maybe one. I'm just wondering if you have any other recommendations for common things that could easily prevent people from having to call an emergency in because they could take measures before.
Right. I mean, Mark might be able to speak a little more to that. What as the police department, what we ask is that people be. There might be a situation where we can't get to you, right? In Sandy, there are certain sections of the town that were completely isolated. With trees down, multiple trees down, where we couldn't get to you. So we ask that people, have the flashlights, the water, the food, at least for 3 or 4 days, just so you can self-sustain yourself for that time period. But as far as I know the town and the state, they do things with tree cutbacks and stuff like that, making check on your equipment, your water heater, all that type of stuff. Curtain drains, make sure. Houses.
I think it's important that people understand that the government can only provide a certain level to you at any given time. But most importantly, as we said, you can get isolated. And when you're isolated, we cannot always get to you. We're going to do our best to get to you. I mean, we'll take whatever means are available to us. ATVs are available, boats are available, fire apparatus and things like that. We all carry chainsaws. The Department of Public Works does a great job. Yeah. But the problem with a storm like Sandy or a hurricane is that many of the trees that come down are entangled in power lines. And we can't risk the safety of our own people. So, we'll have to find an alternate route. And Darien's kind of unique to a lot of areas of this country. We don't have a grid system. You don't drive around the block and you end up on the same area. There's a lot of one-way only you can access to and from a residence. And so we've seen it in Sandy. We had like 60 to 80 roads that were in different levels of being blocked. Some were blocked totally, and others were, you can't get there the usual way, so you had to go basically drive up to New Canaan and come the other way, whatever. So it is imperative for people to take their time and energy to look at their home. If there's a tree that's not looking good and it's been dying for several years, before Maria shows up, it's a good idea to maybe have someone come and look at it and take care of, if it's your tree. If it's a town tree, certainly there's an avenue for that to be corrected as well. But if you look at your home, make sure you're in good shape, make sure you have food supply, water supply. If you have someone in your home that has medical needs, make sure you have enough medicine in your medicine chest to make it through several days of not being able to get to the pharmacy, because everything starts getting interconnected in the chain of delivery. So if you can't get to town, you can't get through town, you're not going to go to the grocery store and expect that they've been getting deliveries too and medicine. I think it's unique that you asked that question, because I can remember I have a sump pump in my basement, and I know if it's going to rain for a day or two and it's supposed to be an exceptional amount of rain, I go down and make sure it's actually working. Because I learned a hard lesson many years ago. It didn't work one time and I flooded, and it wasn't bad. I mean, it wasn't life-threatening or anything. But little things like that ahead of the event can really help in the long term. And whatever you can do to take off the load from your own family and the residents, you're also taking somewhat of a burden off of us, because sometimes people think they're prepared and they find themselves in a bind because of the event. And I'll give you perfect, for instance, you're on oxygen. You're usually on a machine that's plugged into the wall. They have some capability to keep you going. In events like that, they want you to have also oxygen cylinders. Well, believe it or not, day 2 or 3 of our events, we are getting many calls from people on oxygen. The delivery person can't get here. There's not any oxygen left for them to deliver anyways, whatever the circumstances are. So we find ways, I don't want to take the thunder away from everybody on the panel, but that's what the Emergency Operations Center really is working rapidly to solve. So if you call 911, they'll usually take your message and pump it up to us, and then we'll sit there and analyze what's the best way to get there, can we get there, how much do we bring, is there another way to get you what you need. That was almost every, I call it a storm, because not every storm by the time it hit Connecticut is a hurricane, but a lot of times these storms where the power goes out for a long duration and the mobility around town is impacted, we get a lot of phone calls from people that are on generators that are worried that the gas isn't going to be delivered in time, because like anything else, if you're on a propane generator, it only lasts so long. So yeah, certainly, you know, whatever you can do to be better prepared takes a load off of us. It usually makes you feel better, honestly. I think people that, you know, look at their supplies in their house and know that they're in good shape are a little bit more relaxed than someone who, for whatever reason, couldn't get that done before the event. One thing I can say from my perspective is not every event gives you 2 weeks notice. Not every event's Jose or Maria or whatever. A tornado can come up pretty quickly, and it does happen in Connecticut. Earthquakes happen in Connecticut. We're lucky it doesn't happen frequently, but it still happens. So you should really, all of us should be in a good place to be prepared daily. But the reality is, I know many of us, you know, aren't, and you know, to some extent, that's something the population in this country really needs to gear up for and try to be a little more resilient.
Mark, let me just, Tori, if we put together a list of things that people should have, right? Yeah. Where is that? I mean, is that something that's available here? Is it on our website, or?
I can go grab some.
I was going to say, there's some brochures up on the front table here, and I really don't want to put them back in my car. I know you all don't want to take 20 or 30 of them, but if you have loved ones and friends and family, even if it's in other parts of the country, there are FEMA book brochures over there on readiness, on preparedness, what you really should have in your home. So I didn't want to forget to tell you that, but I don't want to have everybody on the panel not.
I'll jump in because it's kind of leading up to it. But on the Human Services webpage on the Darien, the main town site, we also have lists of what people need to be prepared for storms. And going on after what Mark was saying is we have a list. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and Cynthia Hall, our case manager, is also a licensed social worker. So we're here available for any Darien resident in crisis and emergencies and counseling support, whatever we can do to make sure everyone's needs are met. We also have a list of about a little over 70 residents, mostly seniors who live on their own or disabled residents, and we have an emergency contact for them as well. And before a storm comes, we started with Jose, but luckily we didn't have to pursue it. But we would call every person on that list and make sure and remind them to make sure you have your medications, you have food, you have an alternative place you want to go to now, and get them, just make sure that they're prepared and feel safe. And then we also let them know that during the storm, particularly if there's power outages, we will call again and call each one of them. Our office will call and follow up. And if we can't get in touch with them, we'll call their emergency contact. If we can't get in touch with them, we will find a way. Occasionally with the police, but usually our department, we will go out as long as it's safe and just check on them to make sure they're okay. And I think our seniors, particularly and disabled individuals, find it really reassuring. And that's open to anyone who wants to join. So if there's members in your church, particularly seniors who live alone and are scared on their own, or disabled individuals who need to have, extra assistance.
I'll just add one thing that's probably not on anyone's list, but I have a brother who lives in Galveston. He just went through a hurricane, and I have a brother who lives in Jacksonville, and he just went through a hurricane. And they both told me that the best advice I'd given them, and I can't think of it right now, but if you go to Amazon, you can find a one-time use container that you put in your bathtub, and you fill it up with water, and it'll take 100 gallons, which is, everyone goes out and buys jugs, but that's a lot. And then it also has a pump attached to it. So that, and it's got a liner that goes in the bottom of your bathtub, and that's a one-time use. So you fill it up when the water's coming, and you can do that on a half hour's notice. And then you've got 100 gallons of water, which is a lot better than going to your hot water heater, which is everyone's second choice for doing something like that if you absolutely have no water.
Interesting tip.
Quick comment for our first selectman.
Yes.
Both governors in Florida and in South Carolina made it very clear, and I was down there in Charleston just before Irma did. When we say we're going to evacuate, we're going to evacuate. If you're not gone, you're on your own. And they were very clear about this. The first time I really ever heard that from the governors. But it made a whole lot of sense to me, and I applaud them for doing that because it keeps you guys out of harm's way now. For people who are trying to be heroes and you know, dare to the bitter end. I just wondered if you had any comments on that approach.
Yes, I think that approach is certainly appropriate in certain circumstances, and obviously both governors had very sound advice on which to make those decisions about mandatory evacuations. We had a situation during Sandy where we ultimately called for a voluntary evacuation, and we know how somewhat meaningless that is because most people won't respond to a voluntary evacuation. The other reason why it made good sense for those particular states is to give people enough time to get out, get on the roads, get to where they needed to go, whether it was a shelter or if they were planning to go somewhere else in the state or even out of state. We all saw the reports about the, the gridlock on the highways, and the last place you want to be in your car when the hurricane hits is in your car on a highway. So I really applaud the governors for making those decisions, which might seem dramatic at the time. And for those that heeded that advice, it was smart, and unfortunately for those people who didn't heed the advice, they ended up in some very difficult trouble. So we all here work very closely with one another and the governor in the state of Connecticut to help make those determinations. We don't do our work in a vacuum. We communicate through every emergency with our regional partners and our state partners in all of those decision-making scenarios. But we'll always err on the side of caution when it comes to public health and safety.
I'd like to commend you for your question with respect to what to tell people to prepare for. We just have had four recent major events, natural disasters, that act as extreme exclamation points on how important it is to be ready at all times. So I just suggest that everybody look to their own homes and make sure that they have what they need to get by for a few days. Alan, that suggestion for the water, having water available in the tub is a great one because, I mean, water is critical. From the health department perspective, there is probably no aspect of involvement in a disaster that we're not involved in, whether it's water, whether it's the water supply to your home or the water conveyance away from your home as in sewage, food supply, food safety, power outages, ensuring that the food you're able to get, if you can get it, is safe for you. Restaurants, are they still opening when there's no power? Food can become hard to get in times of a natural disaster. So when Sandy was here, there was no power for several days. So we were out working with all the restaurants to make sure that they weren't serving food that was unsafe. We recommend that folks get thermometers for their refrigerators that are on the outside so that you can see when your food, when a temperature is getting out of proper range being about 45 degrees. So if the food is out of that range for any period of time, it's unsafe. So, so in a natural disaster, we're involved in pretty much every aspect of it. Air quality, in the event of maybe some kind of an accident or a fire, we'll be providing advice and guidance to our emergency responders in those regards. Communicable diseases, we would be involved in, we had some discussions a few years back with Ebola, and so we were involved in some issues associated with quarantining. Vector control, mosquitoes and ticks were in the news a lot recently. So we're involved in that. And vaccinations in general. If there was a need for mass vaccination, we would be coordinating delivery of mass vaccine to residents. So there's very little the health department isn't involved in respect to any kind of a disaster or emergency response. And if we're not directly involved, we're certainly providing assistance and guidance as appropriate. And we also, as Jayme had said, partner with our regional and local departments, experts, and state departments for advice and guidance for such events.
I just want to add one little thing about some of what just got discussed, is that one of the main focuses that we have prior to an event and during the event is to get information to folks like you. And we feel, I've always felt that we've done a pretty thorough job, maybe so much that people don't want to hear all the information after a few days. But the reality is it's people like you that need to tell us what you want to hear too. So we sit in a room and we actually go agency by agency to look for that information. So whether the police is concerned about 911 being overused or reporting non-serious things the day later or whatever, the health department will always put in a little concept of what the concerns are. We can even, code red can be used to call everyone in town. It can be used to call certain places in town. I hope everyone here is already registered for our notices. If you've moved, it's important you change your information and add your new address, because we can dial by mapping. You know, if a flood's going to hit a certain area, we don't want to call everybody in town. We want to call the people that are affected by that. EMS will address, like, you know, what you need to do. I mean, everyone at the table, and we're missing a few of our partners. I don't want to make it sound like we do this all on our own. One of our biggest partners in storm-related events is Public Works. They are the people that get out and clear the roads. They're the ones that clear the snow. There's been so many disasters in, I think, the last 10 years, I'll say, because 2007 we had 3 disasters. In 2007 for flooding, but we've had so many different types of disasters, even in Connecticut, blizzards, you know, Superstorm Sandy is what they call it here. So, blizzard.
I thought you said lizard.
Oh. Not yet. That's coming with the locusts.
That would be a problem.
And the frogs.
Maybe on the islands right now they're having getting infected. No, so blizzards. I'm trying to think of some of the things that we've experienced recently that you all will remember. But we had the big blizzard in our region. Darien really did very well. And we collected money for reimbursement from FEMA, but the reality is we were able to keep our roads clear. Meanwhile, our neighbors, there was Bridgeport, they couldn't even get to the hospital. They couldn't keep those open. They were asking for assistance from Public Works partners in the area. So actually Greenwich sent some of their equipment because they were less affected to Bridgeport. I believe Shelton and a couple other towns. We had, I want to say, about 22 inches of snow over a course of a day or so. I believe Bridgeport and Shelton, that area, it was almost 40 inches of snow. And it was over a very short period of time. So preparedness is about everything. It's an everyday, it really is an everyday lifestyle for everyone. You know, you have to have things in your refrigerator and your cupboards that can support your life for a few days. We can't always get to you right away, and I think that's an important takeaway. I don't know if Nancy from EMS or Hayden want to touch on what EMS is involved in and how that unfolds on a day-to-day basis. But
Hayden can go over just basically when you call 911, how do you get a hold of us and what we need to know.
Yeah, so this is just like pretty general, and then Mrs. Herling will talk about our storm preparedness system. But pretty much when you call 911, as we mentioned, it'll go to the police department. Then when they determine it's a medical issue, then they'll transfer you to our dispatchers called CMed, which I believe is Connecticut Medical Emergency Dispatchers in Bridgeport. And then they'll ask you a bunch of questions and determine what resources are needed. So the biggest thing you can do on your part is just stay calm and answer all their questions to the best of your ability, and they'll get you the proper resources you need in the proper time you need it. And they're very good at their job, and we'll get there just as soon as we can, essentially.
What we do in a storm, we have 3 ambulances and 3 fly cars, and we'll staff up to the max for a storm, and the ambulances would be based at headquarters. Our paramedic is on the other side of town, and he'll stay at the paramedic headquarters, so we've got the town covered by those 2 resources. And our fly cars, we might scatter around town as well, because they're about 120 members, all of us trained as EMTs and advanced EMTs, and we live all over town. So if we're worried about getting north to south in town, we might scatter our resources of our adults in different parts of the town, just so if we get isolated, there is some care over there. Our whole membership has radios. We know what's going on. I'd say close to half our membership probably has a good first aid gear bag in their car. So the town is luckier than most. There's so many of us here. And in a storm, we're all listening to the radio and trying to figure out how we can help. But what was really important is we have guidelines where we don't go respond. If the wind's over 45, 50 miles an hour sustained, we're not going to be on the roads unless there's a special situation that fire and police have determined it's okay for us to go with them. But our criteria, which is national, is not to go out, and that's what you also heard when you were watching the Florida storm coverage. It's just not safe for us to go out when you see all the trees coming down and the wires. The other thing we do, we have a whole list of what we have to have so we can be sustained there. We have a great generator. We have a food pantry that we make sure is full. We also have the oxygen. So we're a source of oxygen in town, which social services knows that we can be a source for people who are running out of oxygen. What else am I going to add? One interesting story. One Sunday morning, we woke up early, and the whole town was a sheer piece of ice. And no one could see it. It was black ice. And we probably had 8 calls that morning, all within 45 minutes. And what we did was just that. It wasn't a major storm. No one really knew it was happening, so everyone was on their way to church falling. And including my husband, I was going off to be on duty, and he went out the door and fell. That's how I knew there was ice. So I immediately called people that were on duty and texted our whole system saying, be careful. And I was watching people slide under the bridge in town. They couldn't go straight on Tokenique Road and take a left on the post road. They just slid sideways under the bridge. It was horrific. We started getting calls, and so we would just take all our vehicles and get 2 people to a vehicle and go to wherever we could. But it would take a half an hour to get there, and just have to communicate with people. That's why we like to stay on the line with CMed, so we know what you need, and so they know so you would know when we were coming. But we got fire helped us at some places. We had no ambulance to transport at one of the churches. It was an interesting morning, and no one knew it was a storm. People who woke up an hour later missed it because the sun came out. We had some serious injuries that morning.
Let me just draw a distinction between the library's role in an emergency and everyone else here. I would define what they do as active and what the library does is reactive. We have said to the Emergency Management Committee that we can open up the library in 20 minutes warning. We have 4 or 5 people in town, and if it's passable by snowplows and someone wants to go pick a couple people up and we have identified who they are, the ones who live in town, and once they get to the library, we can be ready in 5 minutes for people. The first 3 times this building opened in 2009, and the first 3 times that the town essentially lost power, after that, the library, by great good luck, kept power. So people got accustomed to coming to the library, and then we lost power, and so the library, the board, the Friends of the Library, did invest in a generator that will run the whole library for a week, so that if we need to be open, and we will be open, we'll be open for as long as a week, and we presume someone can help us get fuel oil to keep it going if it has to go past that. just examples of what we've done. When power goes out, a lot of people start to run out of electricity, and when they come to the library, they just want to get a lot of their electronic implements plugged in. And after the first storm, we learned, so we have 50 power strips that we will distribute around the library so people can plug it in. And we have internet, as long as the wires don't go down. We've got heat, we've got warmth, and I guess one of our librarians was talking to someone who said, thank you for being open. And the way she put it was that, listen, if you lived on a street and it was a cold, wintry night and your neighbors lost power and you had it, you just open up your house and invite them in. And that's the way the library looks at this, is that we're a part of this community and we just invite our neighbors in to come. The librarians will spend as long as they need here. They do that on their own time. And we've done things like we have movies for kids so that kids who are just going crazy can come in and watch a sequence of movies here. We held a potluck dinner. David and his people came to make sure that nobody, because people brought in food. People who had power brought in food, and people who didn't came. And people like Whole Foods gave us, I think I got 7 meatloaves from them that we were able to do and things like that. And I think just the bottom line is we'll be here when there's an emergency and we will do whatever is in our capacity to do it. Remember when Jayme wanted to talk to the town to give a state of the town address, probably the best place to do it was here because we had the resources and a lot of people here. So that's where she came and did it, and we filmed it, and when it was able to get out, we'll get out. So our point is, these are the people who are the emergency responders, and our role is to support them and the rest of the community by just being here and open as soon as we can under whatever circumstances will work best for the community.
If I can add, I was going to say, if I can add one thing to what Alan just said about the library, I think it's, from our committee, it's a great relief knowing that this is such a community hub. It really is the center of the community in times of crisis. Many times, many of you listen to the media, and the media will talk about, well, you know, it's going to be 90 degrees for the next week, and it's a heat wave. And right away, you'll hear the governor of the state of Connecticut put a press release out and say, we're opening cooling centers throughout the state. And they'll tell you to call 211, which is info line for those of you who don't know. You call 211, they'll tell you where the cooling centers are. We've never really had that issue because this is our cooling center. So if someone called my office in the middle of August and say the power went out and they have no air conditioning and they really needed just a little bit of time to come somewhere and cool off, there's 2 places I would tell them to go. Here, which is the primary because they're so good about it, and the other one is to your local grocery store because they're usually pretty darn cool. Here you can entertain yourself, you can read books, you can see a movie. They have done a terrific job being our partners. The generators added new capacity for them and for us. The numbers are staggering when he gives us reports about how many people came through the library on a day that normally most people weren't even traveling. It's always in the thousands, which scares Bob, the fire marshal. But it really is a unique situation, and honestly, we all need to do a better job to let people know that this is such a community spot for people to come, not only for what's here and they're offered, but also for us to get information because we are just next door in these situations where the EOC is open. And electronic media is not always the way to go, but we hit all the media. So when we do press releases, we do the newspapers, we do the cable channels, we do everything possible, radio stations, and we do our code reds, which I hope everyone's signed up for. The police department has a Twitter page. The police department also has a Facebook page. They do daily information every day of the week. We just add to it when it's times of crisis. I didn't want to forget my boss. So before someone else took over for a few moments, I just wanted Bob to mention the fire departments. Go ahead.
Well, I got a question. I don't know if this is really related, but what is the law on occupied buildings with regards to fire sprinklers? system?
So if the building has a fire sprinkler system?
No, what if it doesn't?
It
And it's occupied, and people...
There are a lot of occupancies that are not required to be protected by fire sprinkler systems.
Like, what about a hospital?
Most hospitals are required to be sprinkler. If they were built many, many years ago, there may have been a requirement to not be sprinkler, but I think every hospital over time has come up and put in fire suppression systems.
I know with plumbing, it's always updating the plumbing and heating codes, but so I would assume that, you know, you have to abide by current laws. And there's a building in Bridgeport, and it's a hospital, and they have no sprinklers on all of the 8 floors. And you know, and there's no HVAC exhaust, you know, emergency ventilation system to suck out the smoke in case there was a fire.
So in addition to being required to be inspected by the fire marshal's office, hospitals are also regulated through the state of Connecticut, and they are Department of Health.
Yes. Oh, Department of Health.
One of the divisions of public health.
Yes.
And they are inspected, I'm pretty sure, on an annual basis, and they are licensed by the state of Connecticut. So if they are not meeting any type of code or, you know, that they need to meet, I'm pretty sure they would not be able to be relicensed.
Can a fire marshal give like a 9-year grace period to put them in? 9 years to put in? That sounds like he got paid off. Or the CEO went to bed with him.
Oh boy. It's Bridgeport, not Darien. So
luckily we're not talking about Darien.
I don't want to talk about what there could have been an agreement made through the state, through the State Department of Public Health on the term that had to be done. It could be a phased-in system on a floor-by-floor basis or section-by-section basis. So it's really depends on what occurred with the city of Bridgeport and the state of Connecticut and the specific hospital that you're referring to.
I'd just go talk to the State Department.
I would talk to the State Department of Public Health if you have a real concern, because they license the hospitals. To let you know about the fire departments in town, I'm the fire marshal. I'm full-time. The fire departments in Darien are completely volunteer. There are 3 separate departments. In terms of emergencies, they are all staffed by volunteers. When we know something's coming, they are pre-staffing the stations. Guys are always on standby, and ladies are on standby in the firehouses in the event of any emergencies. A lot of things that what happens is because so many people own generators that are not permanently installed generators, when they go to hook them up, they are putting them in either in the house, too close to the house, and we're ending up with problems with carbon monoxide getting into the house.
Or they forget to turn off the box, so then when power comes on, you've got 2 things going in.
So it needs to be, you need to have it set up. If it's a, you know, if it's a permanently installed generator, it has to be installed properly by a licensed electrician. If you're using it on a temporary basis, if you're plugging a few things into it, that's one thing. If you are feeding it through your house, it needs to be set up with a separate disconnect with a licensed electrician so that you are essentially feeding power back into your house from the generator. But again, it's on a temporary generator. It's making sure it's far enough away from the house so that the exhaust from the generator is not coming in the house, causing a carbon monoxide problem and potentially killing people. The other thing is when we have long-term storms with power outages, you have no power, a lot of times you have no smoke detection. It's really imperative that you ensure that all your smoke detectors work and that they have, if they are electric, that you have some type of battery backup for them, and that you test the batteries and you are replacing them on at least an annual basis.
I might want to add a little bit to that. Putting a generator on your deck, on your porch, or in the garage is no good. That's not acceptable. It's got to be farther away from the house. Is there a distance, Bob?
You should be at least 10 to 15 feet away. You know, and make sure there's no opening, you know, make sure the windows aren't open near it so that the exhaust isn't coming, you know, getting sucked back into the house.
Yeah, we've seen them in basements, we've seen them in garages, and that's not good.
During Sandy, we had a multitude of calls.
So it has to be outdoor.
Outside, away from the house.
We've even, I mean, if you've been in the business as long as some of us have, we've had people bring their barbecue grills into their kitchens, thinking that's a good idea, not realizing they're making CO, they're also exposing themselves to a potential hazard of a gas leak, or if they're using charcoal briquettes. I mean, people resort to some pretty interesting ways of looking at it. They're not realizing they're putting themselves in some jeopardy. Heating's another one, people who use their fireplaces and things like that. So CO, actually, some of the CO poisoning cases we've experienced are during these situations. I think they're actually heightened even throughout the state of Connecticut. I know Sandy, there was multitude in the news about people that almost died, and you know, the levels that they were at. And it happens all the time. We go to these calls for CO calls a lot, but we see a huge spike during these situations where power's out for 4 to 10 days, things like that.
Just to add on power, if you're someone whose only communication with the world when the power is out is your cell phone, because you have let your landline go, you have at least one source of power that you might think about, which is your car. So that, you know, a lot of modern cars now have a plug that you can get to it. Otherwise, you ought to get one that goes into the cigarette lighter, and then you can recharge your phone. But the better thing,
power inverter.
What? A power inverter, right? But the better thing to do is Anker, ANKER, and several other manufacturers make little batteries about this big that will hold power for 5 or 6 months, and will have enough power to recharge your phone 2 or 3 times. And I've got one with me in my car and one in my briefcase, and they cost $20 or something like that. And it's definitely worthwhile getting something like that, because when you need it, you're really, really going to need it.
I'll follow on that and then add a few general comments as well. Your car is a great source of power to recharge some of your mobile devices, but don't do it in your garage. Don't turn your car on in you know, the comfort of your garage. Your car must be outside if the ignition is on. So one of the most important jobs for the first selectman is sort of the executive management of emergency preparedness, and I work hand in hand with all of these people on all decision making. But I want to underscore how it's important to understand that every single emergency is different. And we learn from the last emergency, we take things forward to help improve our response for the next emergency. We didn't talk tonight yet about sheltering, but we have had some experience here with the Navy shelter during Superstorm Sandy. The schools are a critical partner to us in our emergency operations planning and activation. They serve as our locations for emergency shelters when we need to open those. The Darien High School primarily, because they have available a few unique features that we look for in sheltering. The ability to feed a lot of people, shower facilities, large spaces to lay out cots, the ability to separate people into different rooms on cots, and places to shelter animals in cages. So the Darien High School is the perfect place for that. But we're not limited to the Darien High School, because we need to be responsive to the location of where an emergency might happen. Weather's one thing, but for example, if an emergency happened on I-95 or on the Post Road, we would like to be able to use the Mather Community Center as a shelter, but we might not be able to use the Mather Center because it's too close to the emergency site itself. So we have several facilities throughout town that are prepared to be shelters should we need to move them, or should we have a capacity issue where we need to open several different shelters. But we rely very heavily on the school system and their staff to assist us with that. We're so grateful to the library. Alan, Tori, you guys are incredible partners to us, as I wanted to underscore what Mark shared. And our volunteer firefighters. We are a blessed community to have 3 fully staffed volunteer fire corps who are at the ready to assist at all times, not just in emergencies. So as a town and as taxpayers, we need to be extremely grateful for their resource. A couple important parts of my job. I'm responsible to make sure that all of our emergency responders are well trained and get to exercise their plans, which we do with some regularity both locally and at the regional and state levels. I would say that my most important role, though, is communication to all of you. Communication amongst the team, communication to all of you to help try and inspire some sense of calm in the face of emergencies, and to also build very strong, positive relationships with our utility partners and all of our non-governmental partners. We all work together when we have emergencies. I think particularly about Eversource because our power grid is so important to everybody, and we actually bring Eversource into our emergency operations center, and they provide us staff as a liaison so that we can actually begin to prioritize. When the lights go out, we have to prioritize who gets their power back first. And there are critical facilities that will be prioritized, and then some of our more vulnerable citizens will get priority. So the one thing I want to touch on is what you can do to prepare yourself for an emergency. You've heard some of that tonight. You know, get your emergency kits. Always make sure that you're listening to the news reports, listening to local and state news reports so that you can be prepared in advance. When we have enough time, we begin our planning about 72 hours ahead of a known situation. And that gives us enough time to get information out to you, and that's when you should begin preparing as well. Register for Code Red. Make sure you follow the instructions that you're given by local officials. It's very, very important. Another critical piece to my job is to make sure that all of these people are safe and able to respond to the emergencies that we have. When we have hurricanes and whatnot, when the winds get over a certain level, these guys can't go out on the roads. So we don't want to put them in harm's way by responding to unnecessary emergencies if folks haven't followed the instructions that have been given by the emergency team. Make sure that you check on vulnerable family members or neighbors or friends. That's a really great thing about our small town, is that we look out for each other, and you can be very helpful in that regard. And be very patient. We know that day number 3, when the power goes out, everybody starts to get a little crazy. But please know that we are working around the clock, and we are working methodically and diligently to make sure that power gets restored safely. But it does take some time, and we ask for everybody to be very patient. Those are a couple of the things that you can do to help our team in times of emergency. But we always welcome feedback from you. If there's things that you feel as though we need to do additionally or do differently, very open to your feedback, and thanks for partnering with the town.
One of the things I would like to pick up on the Eversource thing is that it's great when you have an issue related to not having power, but the most important thing you could do for yourself is to call the power company, and I'll give you the perfect storm, if you want to call it. You know the power's out in your neighborhood, and you probably will guarantee yourself that your neighbor's already called, because they're that type of person that calls right like that. They need to know every single house that's not with power.
Correct.
If you do not do that, and all the power gets restored to town, and you happen to be that one house that's fed off one circuit that isn't related to some other people, you're going to be told, they're going to be told that you're still out at the end of the event, which could be 10 days. And then you still have to wait for it to get resumed. So it really is important that you pick up the phone, you dial the 800 number, and let them know that your house is out, because it could be the difference between getting it back with your neighbors and being one of the last people to get it back. So I'm only saying that on behalf of Eversource. It's a complaint they have almost every time we have power outages. Even if it's from a car accident, hitting a pole, or a tree that went down in the middle of a beautiful day, which happens occasionally, it is imperative that you do that. The police department only relays that information. So if you call them, they end up calling Eversource.
Just real quick, since Eversource isn't here, one thing I want to touch on before everyone goes home is one of the most dangerous things in a weather event is power lines. And I just cannot stress enough that, especially as a couple days go by and the lines are still out there, you can never assume that a power line is inert, that it's dead, or that it's not a power line, it's a cable line, right? In the early 90s, we had a very bad storm, and a New Canaan police officer, James Martin, was killed by a power line he didn't see. He went out to clear the road from branches, and the ground was energized, and as he got close to the wire, he died from that. You don't necessarily have to touch the wire to become electrocuted. The ground is energized, so as you get closer, you can actually feel the power coming up through your feet. It's one thing that us in the fire department are very wary of. We're never going to, and Bob will tell you, we're never going to trust that a line is dead unless there's a guy from Eversource telling you that he went up and cut the line. So please, do not take it upon yourself to clear a road with branches if there's wires involved. Never grab a wire, even if you think to yourself you're certain it's a cable line. You don't know if that cable line is lying on another energized line, and then that cable line becomes energized. I just never trust a line. Never trust that it's dead, and just stay away.
And the power grid is a very unique thing, and many of you probably don't want to know much about it, but the reality is they have devices in the field that when the power goes out, tries to re-energize automatically. And so it could be dead and your neighbor's lights are out, your lights are out, the next door neighbor's lights are out, and you look out the window and you say, oh, the line's dead, I'm going to drive my car over it. You could be that one instant where the automatic closers try to re-energize the system, and even though it was dead for 15 minutes, you could be a fatality or injured from this system that automatically occurs across Eversource's platform from one side of the state to the other. They try to re-energize automatically the grid. So I don't know if I can tell you this enough. You always leave them alone and stay clear. And honestly, 10 feet, they tell you 10 feet from a high power voltage line's enough. I would say stay 50 feet away. We practice a pole and a half away in the fire service. So if the wire's down 2 poles away, we're safe. If we get closer than a pole and a half, that wire could potentially get energized, start moving around because of the energy it produces, and actually come and go wherever it's not meant to go. So there are systems in place to re-energize it, and then there's those generators that are improperly installed. And you could take a 3,000 kW generator that you bought at Home Depot or Lowe's, and you could plug it into your system at home, whether it's a dryer plug or whatever, to try to energize your house. If you don't disconnect from the street, it goes out to the street, it hits the transformer in the street, which boosts the power, and now you've energized the system just like Eversource does. So it really is the best thing to do in a situation where you have multiple power lines down, is to stay in
actually, the transformers lower the voltage, because those lines, it's a couple of thousand volts.
Right.
It lowers it down for your house usage.
But if it goes the opposite way, it increases the voltage.
Yeah.
So it's
power grid.
All I'm trying to say is, like, we hear the stories, we have some experience. I don't want to experience certain things, so I stay clear when they tell me to. But power lines down, trees, when the wind is blowing too high, I know Nancy mentioned it and Jayme mentioned it. We try to give the message to the public early on before the event to say, please evacuate voluntarily. I haven't been to a situation where we use the word mandatory. It really has a bad feeling for a lot of people who have lived through prior storms to say that. But the reality is, in our message will also be that part that if the wind starts to pick up and it goes past a certain speed, it's unsafe for us to get out in the field. So you're on your own, as you stated. And I think the message has been used and it will be used in the future. So, you know, we're all here to beg that You do what you can to be prepared. We're doing what we can to be prepared, but we all, I think, agree we can do better. So we're always willing to hear from our constituents. Any issues you have, any concerns you have, you know, call us prior to an event. You know, I have a tree that's hanging over my house. I'm not sure if it's a down tree or my tree. We have a lot of citizens that need someone to look out for them. I think the churches is a wonderful place to keep a kind of a feel on the pulse of their congregation. So to me, it's important that you do your part to make sure not only is the church building and you know, your staff members okay, it's really important during the event to, you know, someone's home alone and they're in their 80s and 90s and don't have transportation. If they're willing to ride it out at their house, we need to know that they need to be, you know, welfare check, or we're opening a shelter, we need to get them to a shelter because they need that support. So it's imperative that we all look after each other and our neighbors and keep our own little communities, besides the bigger communities, safe.
And please spread the word that you can, neighbors, friends, seniors, anyone who's frail or has disabilities, to contact us, and we're more than happy to add them to our list. The more people we have, you know, that we can keep our eyes on and keep track of, we're happy to. And so please share that with whoever you know.
Just a quick question, you alluded to it already. Has the team ever found the need to reach out to the houses of worship and the leadership in those places at times over the years during storms and other times of need?
I can mention, after 9/11, I think we didn't even get a chance to reach out to you. I think the congregations kind of reached out to the first selectman at the time. We had social workers that reached out to us that have practices locally. Yeah, so there is a relationship. What I can say is, and everyone knows this, you know, we're a transitional community. People move into town, people leave, staff comes and goes. So reach out to any of us on this panel, whoever you feel comfortable with, and you know, get it set up in advance, because we've had houses of worship that have wanted to shelter their own people, like, you know, their congregation if they needed to. And I know back, it's got to be over 10 years, there was discussions about some of the communities putting generators in some of their fellowship halls and things like that. And I'm not aware of anyone ever doing it. I mean, we see the electrical permits and things like that. So I don't know of any churches that have generator, or at least full generator. But absolutely, if you can reach out to us, we're more than happy to use some of your staff. My takeaway, and the last thing I wanted to personally say, is that we are always looking for partners. Always. Whether you're a corporation and you have things that potentially could be used, Rings End's always been a great partner. We've needed forklifts, they've delivered them to the site, unloaded equipment for us. Houses of worship always reach out to us, but the reality is, if you individually want to volunteer your time, one of the things that we always need is volunteers, and the #1 need is to assist people at the shelter. So if you don't mind sitting and maybe doing a little paperwork so that we know who's in the building at the time and things like that, we always need people who are willing to help out their community members and become a shelter volunteer. We have a small core. It is a very small core. We supplement it through staff, but that is one avenue that we would love more help.
I have a question. So when there's a need, will we be notified as to where the shelters are open?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We'll be very clear about that.
Yes.
First, I want to thank all of you for giving up your evening. I'm sorry there weren't more in the audience, but I'm taking this to a lot of my friends. I have a question, because I've lived here just 4 years, and when I first moved here, that horn thing that goes off, you know, I had never lived near water either. I actually thought it was boats. And finally somebody said, well, no, those aren't boat horns. It's something to do, and now I live right across the street from the Norotan fire station. And of course it's quite loud, but so what starts that? Someone calls 911 and then that thing goes? And
When the fire departments are dispatched, there's a tone that goes out over the radios, and Once that tone goes out, it also sets off the horn on the respective fire department that's being dispatched. Sometimes during the day, all 3 fire departments are dispatched the call, so the horns will go off on all 3 fire departments. And it's to help alert the volunteers so that if they don't have their radio, or if they're in a loud area, they don't hear the radio, they will hear the horn activate and realize that there's an emergency.
I even thought for a while that maybe I was listening, is there some kind of code? Does one station have 2 and one have 3? But it's always the same.
Many years ago, there used to be a specific code by street, so the horns would go, and firefighters, back in the days before radios, they would count the number of blasts of the horn to know what street. They would take out their book and know what road the call was on, so they would know where to go.
Okay.
And there's 6 p.m. time tests every night. It goes up.
I was going to say, we also,
time for dinner.
Going back in a little bit of history, besides the fact that it used to actually dedicate it to what area of town it was in, we used to also use it more regularly for testing purposes, and the town actually used it way back when to say there was no school, so like at 7 o'clock in the morning they would blow the horns repetitively.
Wake up, but you don't have to wake up.
And you know, that would tell the kids, hey, have a great day, if it was snowing or whatever. And then they were also used for disasters. If there was a disaster in town, they had a different signal. So they've kind of weaned back from that.
So the one I hear then is just for Norotan?
It should.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. You might hear Darien though. It's pretty loud.
And I'll tell you,
6 o'clock at night you hear.
the time you'll hear all of them is the dead of winter on a really cold night. It'll sound like the farther ones away are right next to you, especially if you sleep with the window open. A lot of people have a tendency to want fresh air.
So you mentioned kids, and there's another important message that I want to send to families. They might not be here, but maybe they'll watch on the video that's being taken. So one very distressing occurrence for us was after one of the storms where we had a tremendous amount of tree damage and roads blocked. And the sunshine comes out the next day, but there's no school because the schools have no power, and kids are home with their parents, and the kids go out and play. And it was probably the scariest day of my life as first selectman was to watch children and parents with babies in strollers walking underneath trees and around power lines and whatnot. So I encourage you to really be diligent, understand that responding and restoration after a storm takes a significant amount of time. And the danger's not over when the sun comes out the next day. So please keep your family safe and your children safe and your pets safe at all times.
I just want to thank Tori Ogawa, who's put together the whole month of emergency